That's something I said.
Do I have to stand right here?
I'll move the camera around for you, yeah?
I suppose.
Yeah. There we go, so you're live right now.
Okay. Hi.
Oh, the microphone, grab the microphone.
Oh, we're live.
Oh,
Yeah.
But you're all set up. Oops. Excuse me, can
There we go.
Hi. Hello. Hello. Hi. Welcome. Is that good? It's really odd. Okay. Hi, this is Pat Larrabee's show, about to start. History of Old Greenwich. I'm Carolyn Peterson. I help run the Old Greenwich Association, and we'll talk about that after Pat's presentation. But happily, having seen Pat's presentation myself at the Retired Men's Association, I called her immediately and begged that she come. And of course, she's here, which is lovely for us all to enjoy some things we know, some things we don't know, and it's just so much fun. So to know about Pat, if you don't already, you earned a BA from Smith, where she was elected to Sigma Psi. Sorry, I was a Tri-Delt, so I don't know that. Okay, the National Scientific Research Honorary Society, and an MAT from Johns Hopkins University. In 1975, Pat and her husband Tad and their two sons settled in Old Greenwich after living in Bangkok and London. Pat later discovered that she's an 8th great-granddaughter of Elizabeth Winthrop, she of the Winthrop woman, and Robert Feek, living on the land that her ancestors bought from the native people in 1640. So there you go. Pat's career was as a computer programmer, systems analyst, and she has been a webmaster for 25 websites. Pat served as president of Connecticut Ancestry and was editor of their quarterly journal. Genealogy remains a passion of hers, with over 5,000 names in her database. Maybe we're in that database. In 2013, she became historian of the First Congregational Church of Greenwich, which led to learning more about Greenwich's early history, largely focusing on Old Greenwich. She put much of the church's history on Friends of, how do you say it? FCCOG.org. There are even free self-guided audio tours that she created of the church's two cemeteries, plus the stained glass windows. She has been a book editor and author, heading a committee to write First Church's 1965 to 2015 history update to the first 300 years, 1665 to 1965, that book. The new book is called Honor the Past, which is a free PDF download on the church website. Plug. So there she is. All over to Pat, whose presentation could go longer if I wasn't sort of like moving her along. So we have to get to our business meeting. So enjoy it. Know that this is recorded. You can go back and you can share it. And I hope not to be impolite to rush you at all. Thank you.
thank you so much. Okay, next slide, please.
Try to get it bigger for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let's see.
Yay, that's
There we
good.
go.
That's good. Okay, my email is at the bottom, so if anybody has any questions and you don't have time to pose the question here, feel free to email me, and I'll try to do the best I can to answer you. As part of the American 250 celebration, this tour includes extra slides about the Revolutionary War veterans buried in two main cemeteries here, plus a few verbal stories. This tour does not include Greenwich Point, Beach, and Sod Mansion spot, since that tour in 2015 was created by Chris Franco and Sue Baker. And working on this tour has been a great pleasure. I gave an earlier version of this talk in 2015, sponsored by the Greenwich Historical Society for their 375th anniversary. Since then, I've added information about Ladden's Rock Park and removed some of the homes from showing because they were landmark recognitions, but I had no other information about them. Most of the photos in this presentation were taken by me, and those that were not are labeled with credits if known. And people who have helped me and sources and list of famous people are all at the end of the slideshow. So if you don't have time, if I don't have time to even get to those slides, we can at least have them in the presentation, and you can look at them later on the Old Greenwich Association website. there will be a link to it there. So I'm going to go kind of fast. I'm sorry. This, yeah, advance.
Someone wanted it louder.
Oh, louder, sure. Oh,
Louder.
I can lean
How's that?
forward. Sorry.
How's that, good?
Yeah. The whole town of Greenwich began because it had a church. You couldn't, in those days, declare yourself a town of Greenwich until you had a minister and you had enough people moving into town to be able to afford the salary of a minister. So the church was really founded in 1665. But the town of Greenwich still calls it 1640 because that's when the first settlers landed. But that's what all the other towns in New England do as well. So you can look at it either way. The first townhouse was located, we think, just north of Tomac Cemetery. That's the one in the upper left. The next one was 1694. That townhouse was at the intersection between Tomac Avenue and Lockwood Avenue. And I guess that had wood rot, so they tore it down. And the next one was 1735 in the exact same spot, the one in the upper right corner. That was called the Gallery Church, and you can see windows on the second floor. So there was an upstairs gallery up there. Now that was the church that was still in place during the Revolutionary War, because the next one was 1835. And we had a very interesting situation where Joseph Saransky of the Greenwich Historical Society notified our church that there was one minister missing in the list of all the ministers that I had on the website. And it was during the Revolutionary War days. And the missing minister was named Reverend Blackleach Burritt. Now, Blackleach is a most unusual first name, but he was also a most unusual man. He was quite ardent in support of the Patriots and against the Tories and the Loyalists. But the town of Old Greenwich was filled with Tories and Loyalists and Patriots all together. So he knew that he was at risk by speaking out like that at the pulpit. So he would carry a rifle with him up to the pulpit every Sunday. Our only minister to do that, to carry a gun into the church. And he had somebody posted at the door of the church as well with another gun, just to keep the Tories away. But they got him anyways. They broke his bedroom window at night and broke into his house and started dragging him away. And his wife, who was 7 months pregnant with 8 children at home, went running after them saying, "Please, would you let him put on his clothes?" And she was making such a ruckus that they finally decided they'd better stop and let him put on his clothes. They also had one of her cows, and she was able to get one cow back. He was taken to the Coscob boatyard and put on a boat to New York City, which was called, I guess, New Amsterdam then. And he was in a sugar house prison, which had his particular location was just iron bars with no glass on the window. And luckily for him, a fellow who lived nearby was the father of Washington Irving. And the father was William Irving. And he passed him food through the window. So Blackleach Burritt was able to survive that 14 months in that prison with enough food. It was Spartan living there. Okay, moving on. The next one in the church in the lower corner. I don't mean the next slide. The 1835 church burned down, unfortunately, just as they were building the stone church in the middle picture of the lower level pictures. And the reason it burned down was that our minister at the time was Reverend DeWitt Eggleston, and he and the sexton were really stoking the boiler full of extra wood because they had a choir rehearsal that night, and it was winter, and they didn't want the choir people to freeze. But unfortunately for the boiler, it was getting very old and it burst, and the whole church burned down. So he's our only minister who actually burned down a church. The next two pictures show actually the same building, just the older version of our stone building. for the church. They decided, okay, enough with wood. And in 1962, on the lower right, is the final addition that we did to expand the church, doubled it in size. Okay, next slide, please. This shows Revolutionary War veterans that were actually buried in our main cemetery. There are far many more down in the Tomac Cemetery. There are 23 down there, but we have 2 in our cemetery right next to the church, if anybody's interested, because of the America 250. These were brothers. Enos Lockwood was the older brother on the lower picture, and the one at the top is Messenger Lockwood. I included the Binney plot because that is so recognizable, and you can find the 2 Lockwoods based on where the Binneys are. Okay, next. This Perrott Library, of course. This is not, by the way, a chronological tour of Old Greenwich. I decided to make it geographical and just basically go down Sound Beach Avenue all the way to Shore Road, a little jig-jag and Shore Road, and then back up Tomac and across Forest Avenue and then up north. So we're going to go down Sound Beach Avenue at this point. Perrott was first established, well, the library was first established in 1904, and it was in downtown Old Greenwich. It was a much smaller building. You'll see in a couple of more slides. But Perrott Library, the one that we have here, is named after John Perrott, who was a British loyalist and Greenwich's first private schoolmaster in 1766. The village library was located in Sound Beach, now Old Greenwich, Sound Beach School in 1905. And then it was moved to the Mahar building next to Stewart's Market, et cetera, et cetera. One interesting thing about this is that Alice Stead Binney and Helen Binney Kitchell and Reverend Alan Lorimer founded the Greenwich Historical Society and held their first meetings here in Perrott Library. So it wasn't always in Coscob that the Historical Society existed. It began here. So the library has a Binney room and a Wade room. And Dan Everett Wade was the architect for Perrott Library. He lived in Old Greenwich as a summer home. He was an architect mainly in Manhattan. I'll be talking about him again more later. He generously donated the land for Perrott Library. And the great-granddaughters of John Perrott donated the building itself, the cost of the building. And Dan Everett Wade chose Monticello, Jefferson's home, as the basis for the grandeur of his respect for books and learning. And I think that's wonderful. He's an extremely talented architect. I know how that goes, believe me. Okay, next, please. Binney Park. Oh, that's my picture. But it's also in the lower corner, shows what Binney Park used to look like. It was a swamp. It was a mess. It was pre-1928 for that picture. And it wasn't really Mr. Binney's idea in the first place. It was started by his 2 daughters, Helen Binney Kitchell and Mary Binney Davy, who were trying to have a beautiful place for wedding pictures. You know, that's what Binney Park is for in their minds. When you have a wedding in the church, then you can walk across the street to Binney Park and have a wedding photo taken. But the first part of the northern part of Binney Park was 10 acres, and Mr. Binney was able to be persuaded by his family to buy it. And he bought it from George Bowles for $10,000. Well, that worked out well, and they started developing the park, and it was going along fine. But then he realized there's another 10 acres at the south end below Wescombe Wood Road. However, that part was owned by Cyrus Miller. And Cyrus Miller knew Mr. Binney was a millionaire, so why should he sell it to him for only $10,000? So the 2 of them got into a real loggerhead kind of situation. Neither of them would give in. And so Mr. Binney asked our young pastor at the time, Alan Lorimer, to try to negotiate with Cyrus Miller and set up a meeting. And he took the train down to meet Cyrus Miller in near Pelham Parkway in Westchester County. And Cyrus Miller was showing him around his latest attraction that he loved and he was fostering, which was the Edgar Allan Poe House as a tourist attraction. And as they got through the tour, it was just the only two of them in the whole house the whole time. He admitted to Reverend Lorimer that actually this isn't not really Edgar Allan Poe's house. It's way over there, but it was just too expensive to move it over. So I just renamed this house, good enough. Nobody will know the difference. Well, I said, oh, but by the way, you were here to talk to me about something, about Mr. Binney? And Lorimer said, no, I think I've changed my mind. I'm not interested anymore. And he started to walk away. And Cyrus Miller said, well, wait a minute. What are you talking about? And Lorimer came back and he said, I just think that you are too much of a flim-flam artist and I would not stand a chance with you. Goodbye. And he walked away again. And Cyrus Miller said, okay, wait. And they started to talk. They had lunch together for week after week. And suddenly, Mr. Lorimer realized that Cyrus Miller really was looking for a religion, something they could really hold on to. And long story short, Mr. Binney got his 10 acres for $10,000, and Cyrus Miller became a good Lutheran. Also, the parts of Binney Park, the three bridges are all unique and different from each other. You might have noticed one's all stone, the others are all wooden. Those were designed and built by James A.G. Davy of the Davy Tree Company. His father started that company, so he already had money. But he worked hard on that Binney Park as well, even though he was only a son-in-law. He was very devoted to the whole project, though the whole family pitched in. It was wonderful. Okay, next. This shows where the library used to be located, the big blue arrow. That's where Perrott Library had first been in downtown Old Greenwich. This is a picture out of the book that Carolyn Colgrove wrote, one of a trilogy called Becoming Old Greenwich. And I think this trilogy is at Perrott Library. You can check it out. But the very last page shows that map. And I thought it was very revealing that there was a pile of coal right there in the parking lot. Because the Mahar brothers used to deliver coal. They used to deliver, ice. They were into all sorts of things like that. And another little blue arrow over on the upper right, or the upper left, shows where the switchboard was upstairs. And there was a telephone switchboard back in the day when the switchboard operators had to pull out the plug and plug it into the other board. Also, the post office is all by itself on Arcadia Road. There were no other buildings there at the time on the north end of Arcadia. And Sterling Watts was there. That's called Fine Sods now, but Carolyn reconstructed this entire map from Polk's Directory of 1930-31. Okay, next. Oh, Arcadia Center. This is a wonderful place. The picture there of the fellow is Mr. Bigelow. And Edward Bigelow was so talented and so interested in so many different things. He had a keen sense of humor. He was a musician, a scientist, a naturalist, an engaging entertainer, and teacher. And Wallace Warfield Simpson even came to bring children from New York City just to work at this camp because they would learn so much here. I don't think it exists anymore. Somebody asked me at the last time I gave this talk, and I really don't think that certainly not that big building up there on the top, but perhaps the building that's below. I'm not sure, though. It might have been converted into a house. But it had an office, a laboratory, there was a living live animal building, an apiary, photography lab and gallery, botany cottage, and a welcome house. There was a whale of a lot of variety there. It was really amazing. And by the way, J. Kennedy Todd suggested that Bigelow found this whole camp. J. Kennedy Todd got around. He even offered to take the minister of the First Congregational Church who errantly caused that church to burn down. He offered to take him or send him and his wife to Europe for a vacation. So Kennedy got involved. Okay, next. The Sound Beach Railroad Station. It's really called Old Greenwich now, Old Greenwich Railroad Station, but in the beginning, it was the idea of Amasa A. Marks, who was instrumental in getting the railroad to add a train stop at Old Greenwich, because the church had already given 2 acres of its land to the railroad in 1847, but the railroad went right by us. And Marks was very good at getting a station to be built there. But in those days, he had suggested the name of Sound Beach for the station. And the whole town became called Sound Beach, Connecticut. It's now in the National Register of Historic Sites. But luckily on this plaque, it did say it was renamed to Old Greenwich Railroad Station. Okay, next. By the way, there were plenty of visitors that came to Old Greenwich looking for a beach because of the name of the town, and it became frustrating for the people who lived here to say, well, actually, none of the beaches are public. So finally, in 1931, Helen Binney Kitchell and the Old Greenwich Garden Club persuaded the people in Hartford to allow us to rename the town back to Old Greenwich. Okay, this is another church in town, Living Hope Community Church on West End Avenue. The people of this church had attended first the Congregational Church of Sound Beach, but in 1894 they split off when an evangelical pastor, A. Lincoln Shear, was very active. He was very evangelical, very passionate, and about half of the people of the First Congregational Church split off from the Congregational Church. And then soon after the split, Mr. Shear moved to New Jersey. I don't know why, but you can read more about all of this later. Okay, let's move on. I just don't want to. Okay, Sound Beach Firehouse. This is interesting, I think, because it is so magnificently huge in the lower right picture with 5 bays for fire trucks now, but it started off small, as most everything does, I suppose. But it was interesting to me to find these pictures. The volunteers, it's an all-volunteer fire station, and they do amazing how they train. They don't not only train for fire rescue, but for traffic accidents and cold water or scuba rescue, because we're so close to the waterfront, torch handling, building stabilization, and ropes and ladders. They hold training for scouts as well, in the hopes that some of them will become firefighters someday. And before hurricanes, they often have given out sandbags behind the firehouse to people to take. Okay, moving on. Old Greenwich School. When it was first the old schoolhouse, it was 1667. It was just a wooden cabin looking like building. But eventually H.O. Havemeyer got together a group of people to support the whole endeavor to build a proper brick building. And he was quite a mover and a shaker, H.O. Havemeyer was. He gave the town 7 acres on which to build this new school. And they laid the cornerstone and everything. We're still working on remodeling that building, as we will be discussing later in this meeting. Those front stairs have got to go to be ADA compliant. Okay. Okay, this is one of my favorite people, Dan Everett Wade. This was his house. It was originally the Titus Knapp home, built around 1790. That doesn't quite sound right to me. Anyways, it's at number 1 Quintard Avenue. It's now painted white, and you can see in the middle picture there. And it originally had 100 acres of mainly strawberry fields. When you see those farms just going on and on forever, it seems like all strawberries. It was ransacked during the Revolutionary War. I guess Titus Knapp didn't buy it until 1790, but he was actually taken prisoner during the Revolutionary War. So that's circa 1790, forget it. I'm going to have to redo that number, that year. He had heard with his wife that the British were coming, so he hid from the British in the fireplace. I guess it was summertime. There was no fire there going. And unfortunately, his one boot was still visible. And they saw him there, and they pulled him down out of the fireplace and took him off prisoner, along with their 2 cows. Again. But about Dan Everett Wade, he used this house as a summer home. He was an architect and historic preservationist. He designed Perot Library, as I've mentioned. But this is what he really looks like, a nice-looking gentleman. He was president of the FAIA, the Architectural Institute of President of the American Institute of Architects. Okay. And he also designed the June Biddy Parish House. And an interesting thing about that, he was so flexible because the first Congregational Church, the stone building, looked so Gothic and European because Mrs. Binney funded the parish house addition to the church. He designed it with this triangular part of the roof line on the outside to be half timber effect because Mrs. Binney had been born in England. And I think that was kind of like an homage to her. I thought that was pretty cool. And he also was one of the award-winning Art Deco designers, he and his partner. They designed the Metropolitan Life building in New York City, their annex. It was stunningly beautiful. I've seen pictures of it online, along with other fine buildings. And it flowing lines, really beautiful, beautiful Art Deco. Unfortunately, that had to be torn down later. It's crazy. But he designed in all styles of architecture. He was very, very talented. Okay, next. This is the Albertson Memorial Church. Again, on Sound Beach Avenue. We're still working on our way on down. Is of spiritualism. It was first started in Stamford, and then basically after the Presbyterians decided to move over to West End Avenue, they vacated this building, and this building became the Albertson Memorial Church. Okay. This is a favorite of mine. The Jacques Meyer House. It is so unusual and beautiful architecture. It's not the usual chunk kind of a house. It's sloping lines and it's graceful. I just think it looks extremely beautiful and very effective in its design. Okay. This is Father Liebler. That grin of his just gets me every time when I look at it. He started building the St. Saviour's Church in the upper right. He built a lot of it by himself in a manner of stucco. It designed from the Southwest American design. And you wonder why. It's because he learned about the native people and the Navajos from studying under Ernest Thompson Seton in a youth camp there. And eventually he went out there and he studied the Navajo language. He learned their language. He translated the Bible into it and converted many to become Christians. And St. Saviour's is still, from what I understand, working on this connection of the pilgrimage with the Navajos. He first married Frances Marks, whose father was Amasa Marks of Riverside. And his business made artificial limbs for amputees out of the willow wood. Father Lieber helped in that business for 25 years before he entered the ministry. This is the Henry T. Graticat house. The interesting thing about this is that he had been a firefighter in New York City and a luggage maker. And he was bothered by the fact that they would sometimes get the backs of their necks burned by sparks in the fires. So he designed a helmet that would have much more of a rim around the back to protect their necks. He also designed more of a front shield out of leather. So he was an inventor, but they also had a farm and sent vegetables to New York City. And their only child was Frances Graticat Riddebach. She inherited the property, and her daughter married Reverend Baxter Liebler of St. Saviour's Church. And her mother, Louisa, donated the land for the St. Saviour's Church. Okay. This is the Nathaniel, now we're on Shore Road, 179. This is the Nathaniel Ferris home. It first had been a cabin built in 1640, the magic date when the settlers first bought the land from the native people. And so it was found for sure that the WPA project recorded that the cabin was owned by the Feek family. And they probably lived in the cabin while they were building their full house next door. It was just a temporary abode. Nathaniel Ferris was a great-grandson of Geoffrey Ferris, who bought all the land from the Feeks when they finally moved to Long Island. And his daughter, Lucy Peck Anderson, owned the house and inn and called it Caffram Lodge. And she had put up summer visitors for people who wanted to go walking down to the beach. Okay. And just around the corner is the house. We finally know, thanks to Chris Franco's excellent research and remodeling. It was finished in 2018. People have wondered for years, what was the origin of that house and whose house was it really? It was looking so dilapidated for so long, and it now has been refurnished and it's beautiful. And I'm just so pleased that Chris Franco and the Greenwich Point Conservancy and they put so much work into preserving and restoring that house. It still has the original floorboards. The floorboards are so wide, the way they always were for old houses. And when you go down into their basement, you can look up and you can actually see long cracks in the floorboards between the boards, not in the cracks in the woods itself, but it's just the oldest house in Greenwich and one of the oldest homes in America. Okay, I'm moving along fast here, hoping people can read up later. This is Rockland. This is the home of the Binney family. Now, most of you know the name of Binney. Edwin invented carbon black, patented in 1891, for which he was elected to the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2011, way after he died. But carbon black earned him his first $1 million. It was the coating that they put on car tires, which used to be gray, but people get flat tires all the time, and carbon black protected the tires. They got far fewer flat tires. It was a very valuable invention. He also invented blackboard chalk that didn't crumble, and of course, Crayola crayons. And his wife Alice asked him to make the crayons in 8 colors the first time he tried to do it. Edwin was colorblind, but that didn't mean he couldn't tell all of the colors. He was only like red-green colorblind. In the early days of the crayon factory, it was on the banks of the Hudson River. It wasn't here in town. He had to commute over there all the time. And workers would bring their colored crayons home at night and then wrap them in the papers of that color in their homes at night. There were no 40-hour work rules in those days. There were no laws about how long you worked. But back to the house itself, it was built on a rocky ledge. That's why they called it Rockland. And it looked over the popular Oak Grove Beach. And they added on to it several times. There is a windmill way in the back, if you can see it. I'm trying to get this. There we go. It doesn't show. It shows on the wall, but okay. It's right below the light on the wall. There's a windmill there. And Helen Billing Kitchell thinks that that was the only windmill in Old Greenwich ever. But I don't know if it was actually on their property or it was further on up. The Binnies loved arts and entertained often. Mrs. Binney had people over almost every Friday night. And they had their portrait done in bas relief in bronze by their friend from Stanford, Gutzon Borglum, who designed Mount Rushmore. He used to live in Stanford, and that bronze is still hanging in the auditorium of First Congregational Church. That's pretty cool. Anytime any singers from the Metropolitan Opera came to town, she would have them over for dinner on a Friday. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, Ann Street is just parallel to Shore Road. And this was actually built by James A.G. Davy, the husband of Mary Binney. She was the third daughter of the Binneys. And he sold this property to the Rinke family. Arthur Rinke was a noted corporate lawyer. And Mr. Davy was the vice president of Davy Tree Expert Company. That little picture down below in black and white shows what the actual architecture of the building was before all the plantings grew up bigger. It's according to the Carolyn Colgrove book. She actually went to a dance in the Rinke's house. One of her classmates was a Rinke, and she invited all the boys and girls in the class to come to a dance in their living room. It was that big a room. Okay. This is the Quail House Hawks house on Shore Road. It's another landmark designation. Oliver Lockwood Ford owned he was an oyster farmer, and he owned about 100 acres because of his father's fortune trading in the West Indies. Everything below Shore Road was owned by Oliver Ford. And he did oystering. He had all the oyster beds all to himself. The first home that was built below Shore Road was the Binney home, Rockland. And that's about all I can say about that. Okay, thank you. Next one is the Old Greenwich Inn, formerly called the Cathmere Inn. These inns were where the summer visitors would come up from New York City and whatnot to try to spend a summer at the beach. And it was the most amazing thing about this one is not only all the things that they offered for people with tennis tournaments and water sports, dances and such, but during World War I, it housed the Red Cross ambulance driver trainees. During the off season, so like fall, winter, spring, the Red Cross leased this building for their training of drivers, including Walt Disney and Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc was from McDonald's. The inn burned down in 1925, and you can read more about Walt Disney and Ray Kroc later in the very last slide about all the famous people who've lived here. Ray Kroc actually approached Walt Disney because they were pals. They knew each other right there during that training class. They were both teenagers. Walt Disney was 17 and Ray was 16. They'd both lied about their ages to get into the course. But Walt Disney was basically just old enough to be sent abroad after the training period because they'd already reached the armistice, and he did drive people around, including the 10-year-old son of General Pershing, to take him over to the birthplace of Joan of Arc. So he did get around in France. It was pretty cool. But Ray Kroc never made it to France. He had lied too much about his age, and they refused to allow him to go abroad. Okay. The other summer inn is the Castle. It was the Shoreham Club. And there is still a Shoreham Club Road in Old Greenwich that goes out to the beachy area. The castle is shown just from two different points of view from old postcards that I found. online. And the beach part was down in the picture that's on the lower left. That was also a ballroom. And according to Ruth Reed, people would go to that ballroom for dances and such. It was pretty cool. Okay. And this is the Kennison Villa. It still exists. It's still there. It's no longer a villa. It's a private home. So it doesn't exist anymore as a place for summer visitors. But it's a very good looking home. And I thought I'd throw in that little map down there in the lower left, showing the red dots, showing the lines of the trolley. There used to be a trolley going through Old Greenwich down Sound Beach Avenue. It would do a little jig-jag over a little bit towards the beach and then turn around and come back and then all the way up to Stamford and then back and then up Sound Beach Avenue again. In the summertime, according to Mary Dodge Vicker, many people would rent their houses to summer people and then go live in little shacks in the backyard for the summer. And they'd earn a lot of income that way. It was very profitable. Okay. And this give you a better idea of where these summer inns were located. Kennison Villa is still there. The Old Greenwich Inn is gone, and that was on the edge of Ledge Road. And Shoreham Club Ballroom is on the shoreline, as you can see, but the castle was more on Shore Road. Okay. And this inn is still existing, but it's in the form of condos. It was a summer inn, built in 1895, and Chris Franco and his wife Rachel helped to convert this whole building into condos. But you can still see the basic outline of the building. They didn't just tear it down or anything. It was just totally remodeled. Okay. And this is Tomek Cemetery. It's also called the Tomek Historic Burying Ground. In the far back, you've got Innis Arden Golf Course and a lot of unmarked field stones, which are just stones all over the place. It's surprising that people would consider those to be burials, but we don't. It's just a puzzle. We don't know for sure why they did that, except one speculation is that it would hide the fact that the white men were dying, and the local Indians wouldn't know as well. You can read about how this man stole headstones, trying to sell them for garden ornaments. Oh my word. He lived on Highview Avenue, and neighbors luckily reported him, and the headstones were retrieved, but sometimes people didn't know which position the headstone should have been in. Anyways, the Gershom Lockwood headstone of 1718 disappeared twice, and it was retrieved and put in the basement or the archives of the Greenwich Historical Society for safety. Okay. And this shows how much John Perrott was still causing trouble, even though people loved him as a teacher, because he was a Tory and he was born in England. So you can't blame him for being a Tory, really. But the only plot of land that they would give him in Tomek Cemetery is way in the back on a rocky ledge. They just couldn't, and they actually took some of his land away from him, or much of his land away from him after the war, Revolutionary War. The feelings ran very strong. Tomek has 28 veterans, 23 were from Revolutionary War, and 6 from the War of 1812. One of those fellows fought in both wars. In the Second War of 1812, he was more of a scout. And our 2 cemeteries of the church have mainly Ferrises, 235 Ferris burials, 178 Lockwoods, 135 Palmers, and 122 Pecks. Those are names that have stayed in town for a long time. Okay. And this is where the Revolutionary War soldiers were buried in Tomek Cemetery. For those like the SAR and DAR people, this shows the 23, the listing on the right-hand side, and then the numbers on the map show where that person was buried. This was a very carefully done map. 3 years of Eagle Scouts have helped with documenting Tomac Cemetery, and we are so grateful to them. They mapped it out, and they restored headstones, and they also photographed the cleaned headstones. And the First Congregational Church has a record of all that. It's wonderful. And if you go to, on the very bottom line there on the left, go to fccog.org and just type in our cemeteries, for instance, you'll see all sorts of documents for how to see this full research paper. This is just one page out of that research booklet that the Tomac Historic Burying Ground Committee did long ago. Okay. Oh, this is one of my favorites. The A. Lincoln Ford House. It's so beautiful. It was a Queen Anne style, and it's one of the best examples of the Queen Anne style architecture in Old Greenwich. There's a cast iron weather vane and a directional signal on top. And Abraham Lincoln Ford was a prominent oysterman, and he was a son of Cornelius and Sarah Jane Rockefeller Ford. Yes, those Rockefellers. And he was very smart, and he generously donated the large plaque on the entrance stone to Tomac Cemetery. Okay. And Innis Arden Country Club. I'm not going to read you all the history. I'm going to have to ask you to read it later yourselves. We're getting close to the time for your meeting. But the Ferris Farmhouse in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the same architecture of their clubhouse in 2022. They finally dismantled the whole clubhouse. It was probably getting kind of rotten on the inside. It was an old farmhouse from 1815. But it used to be, originally, that picture at the very top was the Innis Arden Golf Club on J. Kennedy Todd's estate. And Todd was a Scotsman, and Innis Arden is a Scottish name. So that's where the name originally comes from. But feel free to read more about it. There's a lot more to tell you. We have to move on. And okay, now we get into the manufacturing part of Old Greenwich, which was really quite amazing. There was the Dalton Manufacturing Company. They did lathes. The lathe, well, you turn the wood on the lathe. Then that was 1919. In 1926 was the Chic Magazine Repeating Razor Company. They were for razors for men to shave their heads, their faces. And then at the same location was the Welty Tripp Organ Company. How can I imagine an organ company being here? They noticed that was 1928. They moved out from New York City for cheaper land here, but the Depression hit right after they moved here, and their last organ was 4,500 pipes. It was huge. It was for a church in Boston. And then across the street, or the fourth building in the same place, was the Electrolux factory in 1933. So that was a few years after their Depression. Finally, businesses could get going again. And the Electrolux company built the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, we call it now, but it was then called the Ekman Center. It was meant for the recreation of their employees. They had a bowling alley and basketball courts and whatnot. It would have all sorts of recreation going on there. And finally, the town of Greenwich bought it. And it has been torn down, as you know. And here we are in the new building. Okay. This is how I discovered about the Welty Tripp Organ Company, again, from Carolyn Colgrove's book. That blue arrow points to the Welty Tripp Organ Company. Okay. This is the house where the people went to have a religious service during the schism of the First Congregational Church. The Lincoln Shear was the evangelical preacher who got the more evangelical people to walk across the street and take Mrs. Orr's organ out of her house and have a religious service in the lawn while another religious service was going on at the First Congregational Church. Okay. This is the Captain Nathaniel Peck house. It's probably the second oldest house that's still living in existing in Old Greenwich. It was bought 3 years ago by Chris Franco and his wife Rachel, and they worked hard to restore it and make it very beautiful. And I really have a lot of appreciation for people who will save old homes and restore them properly and keep them going. It's got a 12-foot square chimney. There's a lot of wonderful thing about it. But the Daniel Ferris bought this whole property, and it was about 300 acres that he bought for a farm. It included a lot of Old Greenwich. This is Ladden's Rock Farm. I'm going to have to breeze through this fast, but this shows the outline of the post road. It's at the top. It's Ladden's Rock Road down the side on the left, Forest Avenue, and then back up Harvard Avenue, basically, but also through the swamp. That just shows you the outline of the Ladden's Rock Farm. The next slide shows you a movie that was made at Ladden's Rock Farm in 1922. That gondola on the left was built in Bridgeport. Marion Davies in the middle was the paramour of William Randolph Hearst, a millionaire, and William Powell, a young William Powell, was trying his darndest to look dastardly and villain-like. He was the villain in the movie. You can still see it on YouTube. Just type in "When Knighthood Was in Flower," and you'll be able to watch the entire movie on YouTube. Marion Davies played the younger sister of King Henry VIII, and she wanted to marry a more dashing, common person, but he wanted her to marry somebody who was in royalty. And so that was the main story, the conflict between the two and whether she won out or not. She did. She finally persuaded her brother to declare her paramour to be some royalty name or something, and then she could marry him. Okay, moving on. This is what a really Ladden's Rock Farm looked like, at least in the lower two pictures, and the upper one was the gatehouse. And it's teeny, you can't really see it too well, but there are two black horses with a carriage standing in the road next to that gatehouse. Those two black horses were William L. Marks' pride and joy. Ladden's Rock Farm was big and huge, but now it's a ShopRite shopping center with parking lot. Take Paradise, build up a parking lot. Yeah, that was it. Okay. We'll have to go rest of the slides. Yeah. Let's just show the rest of the slides. So Guy Lombardo lived here. Joseph Dillaway Sawyer built it. This is another Joseph Dillaway Sawyer. It was a city block long. It had 38 rooms. But he also built these little tiny cottages on the side. This is north of Palmer Hill Road, the Hillcrest Park, another beautiful home in Hillcrest Park. The Lady Elizabeth Gowdy Baker was an artist. She painted that portrait of Melville Dewey, inventor of the Dewey Decimal System. And the grandparents of Michael Learned of the Waltons lived in that house. And so Michael Learned would visit here once in a while. Havemeyer Park, H.O. Havemeyer. He was very wealthy. And could you just go back a little bit? I know. Gene and Polly Lauder Tunney. Gene Tunney was a famous boxer, and he married an heiress to the Carnegie Steel inheritance, and her family donated Island Beach to the town. And H.O. Havemeyer married an heiress as well, and they donated over, 2,000 French Impressionist paintings and other works to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So if you've ever been in the Metropolitan and you've seen H.O. Havemeyer around it, you wonder, was that the same guy as here? Yeah, it was. Okay, Condé Nast. He had quite a publishing industry. I think you all are aware of that. But he really wanted his grounds to look beautiful. Okay. And after Condé Nast moved away, the Consolidated Diesel Electric Company, or CONDEC for short, was there. And they built this little insert vehicle called the Gamma Goat vehicle, which was built for the Vietnam War days. It was extremely necessary because the Vietnam terrain was very muddy and very hilly, and you needed some sort of a vehicle that could maneuver all of that. It had 6-wheel drive between the Jeep itself and the trailer behind it. So it could turn on a dime. It was amazing. That fountain, I've got to tell the story. Some guys who were working at the Condé Nast publishing company overnight, they were on the night shift. It was so hot on a summer night. They just decided, this is just sweltering. Tomorrow, let's bring some towels and let's take our break and go into that fountain and take a swim and cool ourselves off. Well, one of the guys had a bright idea of bringing along a big box of soap, powdered soap. So they poured the soap into the fountain as well. Turned out they made a mistake. They didn't realize that the fountain pool was not flat. It was conically shaped. They couldn't get out. They could not climb out because it was so slippery. They finally shouted, and then the night watchman came about and got a rope and pulled them out eventually. But that oral history is in Pat Larrabee. Earl Bragdon used to be a member of the First Congregational Church. We knew him. Okay, these are my sources. And next slide shows credits for all the people who've helped me. I am so grateful to all of them. Next is the famous people who have lived here. Take your time to study this on your own time later at the Old Greenwich Association. You can bring up this slide. It's quite a remarkable list, including Walt Disney, Claire Booth Luce, John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. This.
Okay, but I'll just talk for a second. Pat. Oh, okay. But Pat, thank you so much. Sorry to rush you. You can imagine we could have enjoyed that for a whole nother hour. We know, but it's a teaser and you can enjoy it at your leisure. And we can always find Pat because we have your email address at the top. But thank you so much. And thank you for saying yes to this shorter version.